Hello, I'm Dr. Will Austin, and this is your second video for UAS 106, Safety and Security in Unmanned System Operations. And today we're going to talk about risk mitigation. What does it mean to mitigate risk, and why do we do it? So today we're going to talk a little bit about the FAA and what they say about risk mitigation. We'll talk about location risk, airspace risk, environmental risks, the risks of working with humans, and other factors that may influence your level of risk when operating unmanned aircraft in the National Airspace System. Let's talk about aircraft numbers in 2020. And again, these vary. One of the kind of things to remember is where we sit right now, there are over 1 million unmanned aircraft or drones operating in the recreational space. There are 412,000, and this number is obviously, by the time you're even hearing this, these numbers have increased, commercially registered unmanned aircraft. And by 2023, there's a thought there's going to be over 2 million. Well, you could just kind of look at those numbers, 1,412,000, and think about the number of unmanned aircraft that are sold every year, and you get the sense. We'll be, by 2023, we'll have exceeded 2 million. That's a very conservative estimate. Let's also then look at manned aircraft at the same time, and these are going to be 2018 estimates. The general aviation fleet is about 213,000 aircraft, and the for-hire carrier fleet is about another 7,400. And in fact, manned aircraft is actually decreasing in number. And if we think about the COVID pandemic of 2020 and how many aircraft were basically grounded from lack of people traveling, then those numbers will probably even decrease some more. So clearly, when we talk about the National Airspace System now, unmanned aircraft are the predominant aircraft. The issue is how many of the million are in the air at any given time? How many sit on shelves, sit in closets? How many were a purchase because it seemed like a fun thing to do when you were at Best Buy one day and you really didn't know much about unmanned aircraft systems? So in the end, you decide, well, this wasn't for me, but what am I going to do with it? Am I going to sell it on eBay, or am I just going to let it collect dust? So again, I often say the real test of how much the proliferation of drones is how many you see driving to and from wherever you're going at any time. How many do you actually see in the air operating and conducting some kind of business? And again, I probably see more because we have a flight training center, so I'm seeing them all the time, and our poor neighbors at the college are probably seeing them all the time. But for the most part, you're still not seeing them in a lot of areas flying around and doing things. But when you do, when you start to see them more and more and more, let's hope that the risk mitigations that we're teaching you to use are being used by those pilots as well. So a little bit about the FAA, and again, I'm not trying to be critical here as much as I'm trying to say you cannot rely solely on a federal agency to manage your operations. It comes down to you. Now, the FAA has said you are responsible, but we do need them to be developing knowledge and regulations and materials to assist us as unmanned pilots, so that every one of us, 400 and some thousand of them, licensed pilots, aren't coming up with our own systems, if you will. So the FAA has designated 7 test sites for unmanned aircraft systems, which facilitated at the time of this video about 15,000 UAS flights between 2015 and basically 2020, and supported all kinds of research. Public and private entities have used the test sites to test their technologies for various UAS activities, from inspecting utilities to carrying passengers. The research conducted is to provide data on performance and capabilities to help with the integration of unmanned aircraft into the National Airspace System. So this is again from the GAO and the Government Accounting Office. And so you've got, your UAS test site staff, you got your command center, your launching, your mobile radar, lots of visual observers and other ground vehicles, and also a chase aircraft. So this is a good concept to help. But the problem is the FAA, according to the GAO, has not leveraged data or the program to advance this integration enough. According to the 2018 roadmap for UAS integration, a key goal is to provide data from these test sites to influence FAA decision-making on drone integrations. And the FAA has said that they intend to use the data to a greater extent in the future. But the GAO, who audits government agencies, says, well, you need a better analysis plan. You're going to miss opportunities to use this data to help with the integration effort or to inform operational standards. So you can see that, as I said in the first video, the rate of change outside of the FAA is moving so fast. It almost seems like every month there's another unmanned aircraft system. There's an upgrade to existing platforms. Think about how, if you fly DJI drones, how many times you have to do the precise fly upgrade. It's constant. And this is for safety, so it's good, but you're relying on the manufacturer. Okay, and the FAA isn't able to keep up at this time with the level of change outside of the agency itself. And think about it. If you go to one of the FAA UAS conferences, the conversations are that integration, and we do it here, of manned and unmanned systems, even practices from manned aircraft. Now, there could be a fundamental flaw in thinking that what happens in manned aircraft always happens in UAS or unmanned aircraft. So this is going to be an interesting time period that you're going to watch unfold. But the GAO, who again audits, they're saying, listen, Federal Aviation Administration, you got to share more information. We talked about that in the first video. That holding it too close to the vest is problematic. And again, some of the argument may be, well, we're letting people into these test sites and it's proprietary. We can't share. Well, you can't share the proprietary part, but you can share other things that will inform operational standards. So what the GAO told the FAA was, develop a better data analysis plan for this data. In other words, yeah, it's great that you have this data, but if it's all on your computer and it's not being shared and you're not analyzing, you're not looking at it, it's not informing the industry. Share more information on how this program informs integration, and the GAO admits you got to protect the proprietary data. So what they're saying is, oh yeah, you can't use proprietary data as an excuse, FAA, to not share information. You have to share more. The good news is they partially agreed with the first recommendation and they agreed with the second. But these test sites are a bit of an enigma. Go ahead and Google, try to find one. They're around the country, usually in remote areas. But how much information can you find that's coming out of these testing operations? Well, maybe a little bit if it's a kind of product that's being developed and going to be sold. The manufacturer might share more data than the government has shared with us. So, got to keep this in mind, because your job as a professional pilot is to inform yourself. But understand there may be more information and more knowledge out there that you may not have access to. So you got to dig a little deeper and look for it as you move forward in the industry. And keep an eye on FAA decisions, the FAA Advisory Committee, and what the GAO or other government agencies might be saying. Look at the next reauthorization. It'll be coming up in a couple years of the FAA and of aviation standards, what they say about UAS. Go back and look at the history of this. So Congress will say things as well. And I think one of the issues is Congress is demanding things of the FAA, but they may not have the personnel, the knowledge in their own operation to do all this. And again, not criticizing them. I'm saying it's almost impossible to stay up to date on a lot of this. And that's going to become problematic. So the responsibility then goes back to you as the remote pilot in command. Your job is to become the safest, most professional pilot possible. Because if all you're doing is relying on FAA regulations and guidelines, or what some member of the legislature who's never held a drone has passed some law, then you're probably not doing everything you can to be a professional pilot. You cannot rely on the government. You have to take responsibility and ownership of your flight operations. So, in kind of the question of the semester, as we go through and you go through all our documents and you think about UAS operations and you think about the integration of millions of unmanned aircraft into the national airspace system, with 500,000 manned aircraft probably taking off all the time and flying their patterns, you have to ask yourself, I'm responsible, of course. This is a big task. And can any one government agency do it? Can a government agency that's really been dedicated to manned aircraft for 100 years, can it integrate? Can it even acknowledge and accept and understand the technology to mitigate this risk in a global effort? Very hard. So this is a question I want you to just kind of think about as you move through this course. And again, it's not to pick on the agency. They just happen to be the ones that are tasked with this. And remember that concept of the rate of change. Jack Welch is right about this. What he was saying to the people that worked for him at GE was basically, if the world changes outside of our organization faster, then we're all going to be out of business. So keep that in mind. Well, let's talk about the drone incidents. And so there's the link at the bottom where this site came from. It's time sensitive, so when you go there, your picture will look a little bit different. Hopefully not too much different. But this is a map of worldwide drone incidents. And when you look at this, look at the United States, look at Europe, it's just covered in incidents, right? Well, remember, and you know this from your GIS course, you got to dig a little deeper. So let's zoom in a little bit on the United States, if you will. And still looks pretty significant. Drone, a lot in California, a lot in Florida, a lot in Michigan, Washington area, up and down the East Coast corridor there between D.C. and Boston. You see all these in it. But look a little bit at Oklahoma or Texas. You're talking about 4. So let's zoom in again. So you're really talking about incidents in the New Jersey, New York area of about 5, in Philadelphia of 1, down in the Baltimore area of 1. Okay, so now this is good. It means there's a lot, it means there aren't a lot of reported incidents. Now, if there are more incidents that go unreported, we don't know about them. But looking at it, so far, so good. But again, remember what I said. Do you see a lot of drones in the sky doing things on a regular basis? So we need to be thinking about this. So Bill English of the National Transportation Safety Board, and I highly recommend you go look at his videos. He does a great job of kind of demystifying these things. Posts a number of videos on drone operations to show when the National Transportation Safety Board investigates them. A lot of them are not drone incidents in the end. Right now, there's a kind of and again, I would argue this comes from a lack of information, a lack of knowledge out there. There's a lot of what I would call false kind of reporting. He does a great job of showing bird strikes that are often thought to be drone strikes, and he demystifies it and shows that where it was a drone incident, where it was not. And this is important. We need to get to a point where we have good numbers on the incidents. Because remember what we said in your last video, we learn from errors. We do not learn from perfection. Okay, and that doesn't mean we want a lot of errors out there, because we want, every time we have one, we want to learn from what was done wrong, so we don't replicate inappropriate actions, inappropriate operations. So the more incidents we know about, the more we can learn. Otherwise, we're constantly taking the lessons of manned aviation and trying to apply it here, which is a good first step, but we'll learn a lot from unmanned errors and inconsistencies. And we'll spend a lot of time in this class talking about them. And the goal isn't to say, play the blame game, or to say, hey, here's what bad operations look like. Here's what we want. Here's what great operate. The goal is to look at accidents, incidents, and say, what went wrong? What was the thinking there? And how do I make sure I never do that? Because again, it's your responsibility. Is there an issue? So what do I mean by this question? Here's what I'm kind of asking. It's great to say we don't have a lot of incidents, we're keeping everything safe. But remember in our values what we said. That past history is the past. And our operations are only as good as our next flight and our safety and our risk mitigations in that flight. So is there an issue? There's always an issue. We cannot say, oh, because we don't have that many incidents, everything's going well. We don't have that many incidents because we've probably been lucky. And so we want to get to a level where UAS operations are more broadly understood. And as we integrate more of these unmanned aircraft, there will be more incidents. But how do we grab those incidents right away and learn from them? Think about your CRM. People were flying for decades before someone had the kind of insight to say, it shouldn't be one pilot adventurer dictating everything. The whole crew should be involved. We should have more communication. We should have more crew resource management. So it does take a long time to learn things sometimes. So you need to be asking as a professional pilot, what can I learn now to prevent myself from being one of those people other individuals learn from? When it comes to unmanned operations, is a serious issue likely? We're not at a place where it's unlikely at this point. But this is a question you asked her. And the only one that can prevent a serious issue is you, the remote pilot in command. Your practices, your professionalism. So the question for the semester is, can the FAA do this? Can they integrate? Can they put enough operational guidelines in to make the airspace safe? What can they do with drone pilot operations? They have some court rulings and some laws that aren't always in their favor in terms of regulating this industry. So let's also remember that. Are they up to the task? Can they, as an agency, move at the rate of change equivalent to the rate of change outside? It's an interesting question. Hopefully it's a question they're asking themselves on a daily basis as well. But as students, we need to ask these kinds of questions. We need to be inquisitive. We need to be thinking about these things. So, in essence, right now, the question, and you know the answer to this, who's responsible? You are. That's why the professionalism matters. So, regardless of your opinion on whether the FAA is up to that task or not, it doesn't stop your ultimate goal to be a professional, safe pilot. So, whatever the FAA can give us, excellent. But in the end, it's going to be your professionalism that might be the difference between a catastrophe and a incident that's been managed and mitigated to the point that no one gets hurt. So, when we're out there, when we're thinking about risk mitigation, we can't rely on the government. We can only rely on ourselves. And the responsible party is us. So we got to come back and say, what are all the things I have to look at in order to figure out what the risks could possibly be and to mitigate them? And in some ways, we have more risks as unmanned pilots because we have an aircraft we're not on, and we're on the ground, and it's in the sky. And so there's two things to kind of think about instead of everybody in the aircraft. And so all the risk is up here. We got risk everywhere, right? So we got to think about what we're doing. So location risks on the ground to be considered and to think about is, your population density is a risk. There's no population. The drone falls out of the sky. You're in a remote location. It's going to hit the ground. You're in a densely populated area, people moving all around. Some of the videos will show drones fall out of the sky, near misses on people on the ground. That doesn't inspire confidence in the industry. So if there is a large population, have we mitigated that risk? What have we done? Radio frequencies, spectrum analyzers, looking at it. What is the interference level? Okay, I know there's a lot of argument whether this interference affects the operation. Of course, it has to have an impact. If we're all on the same frequency channels, there's going to be a problem at some point. So again, that's almost, you're more densely populated, more radio frequencies because more devices at all times. Roads are a hazard to us. They can be a hazard for a number of reasons, but you really can't fly over cars because there's people. You don't want to fly over moving vehicles. It's dangerous. How do you avoid these situations? In some cases, maybe not, but there are ways to mitigate. Structures are an issue. Okay, think about line of sight. And both visual and radio frequency line of sight. So visual line of sight, I can't see the drone because there's too many structures around, but also the interference of your radio frequency. People, bystanders, all right? These are all things that may be location-based risks on where you're flying. And you need to mitigate them and be thinking about them and planning. Always plan for the worst, all right? Fly and be professional for the best, but prepare for the worst. Think of some other things. What are some other things on the ground, locational issues that you may have? Okay? Could be wildlife, right? Especially in a remote rural area. So last time I had you looked at Phillipsburg, Sky Vector. Look at it again. Take another look. Think about the location risk versus the Washington campus. Think about what went into our planning. Why did we do it? Why did we fly at one location and not the other? What was important about that? Remember, always go back to the JARUS SORA in your mitigation. Read that. It's part of your textbooks for this course. But essentially, it's a pretty simple concept of what they're trying to explain and get us to do. Understand what your flight geography is. Okay, what's your area? Geofence it. What's your contingency area? Geofence it. All right, and when do you employ emergency procedures? All right, so if you're looking at the location in this regard and thinking about the operational mission, you can take care of problems in that contingency volume area before you're in that risk buffer area. Okay, so we'll spend a lot of time on this in this course. Don't forget your legal considerations as well for your location. All right, so you can go to this website. You can Google rubric law, drone laws. Jonathan does a great job of kind of updating this constantly and saying, here's the laws of your state or location. We can get into a whole conversation, and we do this in some of the other classes, about whether some of the laws are passed or legal and won't be defeated in court challenges, and many of them have already been defeated in court situations. Those laws are enacted because people aren't informed. They don't understand, or they're concerned. There's a lot of lack of professionalism in this industry right now. So what do we do when people won't police themselves? We enact laws. That's why legislatures exist. Become familiar with them. You're a professional. You can have your theories. You can have your opinions about laws. You can think, oh, these laws, that's fine and good. Follow them. Professionals follow the law. They do the right things right all the time. They take it up a step. They say, oh, if this is where the law stops, but it's not There's still additional risks that haven't been mitigated. We go above them. That's what a professional pilot does. You have environmental risks. All right, so now we've mitigated all our location, or at least we've identified our location risks. Now we have to look at our environmental risks, and all this starts with thinking about it, identifying it, writing it down on paper. What you're going to do is document it in the Skyward system. But weather, all right, that's an environmental risk. Wind, rain, they all impact flight. Heat and cold, all right. Are you flying over land? Are you flying over water? What are you doing? And that could be in the location as well. What are some other environmental risks that you can think of? All right, because in order to mitigate risks, you have to pre-think them. You have to identify them first. What are human risks? Boy, they seems to be a longer list, right? People on the ground. All right, we don't want to hit them. We don't want our drone to crash into them. So we don't want to fly over them unless we've mitigated and have permission from the FAA for such operations. But they also can come up to you. They can be a distraction. People are curious about drones. All right? They want to know about them. Be aware of that. That's a human risk. Not training your crew. Not having a properly trained crew. Using people who don't know what they're doing and calling them crew. This is all human risk. Not employing crew resource management or aeronautical decision-making practices. Just being careless or reckless. Let's say you're out on a long day of mission, right? You've multiple flights. It's hot. You've been out there for hours. It starts to affect your mind. Sometimes we don't realize that until it's too late. That's careless, right? Not taking care of yourself. Reckless behavior. Oh, I'm a AUVSI top certified pilot. I can fly circles around you. Okay, bad way of thinking. All right. The reason why you're working on that certification is to show the world that safety and professionalism come first in your aviation and your unmanned systems usage. And again, that feeds into that concept of overconfidence. What are some other human risks? We have many, stress, there are tons. Think about because in order to mitigate them, you have to identify them beforehand. How do we kind of help you through this process? Well, number of ways, okay? Couple of different things. So we worked really hard with our friends at Embry-Riddle to put together a number of these. We had a number of them in place, but there were some, we as an organization needed assistance with, and we wanted to get assistance from the best. Every one of these things is uploaded into Skyward. You have access to them. These are the documents of your course in many ways, and we want you to be aware of them. There's the Flight Operations Manual. This is going to go over all of our practices and procedures with regard to unmanned aircraft system flights that don't take even more manuals. A safety management system. We are employing a safety culture. We value safety above all else. We have a system that it's a system of continuous improvement for safety. Master hazard and risk mitigation matrix. So we've figured out, we often fly at the Smith Flight Training Center. What are the risks of that site? And how do we mitigate them? What are the risks, general risks of operations outside of that site, that controlled space that we have at the college? What are those mitigations? And we have those as well. And then each site's going to require probably some more mitigations that you're going to identify: location, environmental, airspace, and risks associated with people. Each of our aircraft has a standard operation procedural manual. So the Phantom 4, we have a unique one. The EB, we have a unique one. The Wingtra, we have a unique one. The Mavic, we have a unique one. The unique Typhoon has one. The unique H520 has one. So every aircraft has a manual that adds to the manual of the aircraft produced by the manufacturer. So remember your Part 107 test that said, follow manufacturer guidelines, and then if they exist, well, what we've done is what didn't exist, we've created for each of the aircraft. So you have access to that in Skyward as well. Now, checklists. Checklists prevent accidents. They mitigate risks. They, in and of themselves, are a risk mitigation tool. So we have a pre-flight site survey worksheet, location risks. We have a flight crew checklist, a standard operating procedure we want you to go, pre, during, post-flight, and emergency procedures. That checklist deals with things like airspace, aircraft, crew, all of those things. Making sure we follow the same steps every single time to prevent accidents or mechanical failures. Or if we're in an emergency, you have your checklist, you know exactly what to do. General operations checklist, that's going to be your environment, in a large part, your environmental checklist and your human factor checklist. So your pre-flight survey, number 1, and number 3, that's going to cover and help you identify all these risks to mitigate. And then your FRAT worksheet, which is really your risk assessment. So there's a reason why you go through and do every one of these checklists, and you set it all. It's all set up in Skyward. You click through them prior to your flights so you can get your flights approved. And that reason is when you mitigate and identify all the risks possible, you can then make sure that those risks don't affect your operations, or at least you mitigate it so it's less likely and less severe if something does happen. In addition to that, if we get into other operations that are more complicated, like night or human flights over humans, we have our certificates of waiver with instructions from the FAA on how that's supposed to be done. But we also have a manual for each of them to say to you, okay, this is how you conduct operations over humans or at night, and these are the procedures in these complicated flights we expect you to follow. All right. At some point, if we ever get to the point where we have beyond visual line of sight, we would add another manual here on how to conduct those operations as well. We want them conducted the same way. We want the risks identified. We want the risks mitigated every single time. We don't want an incident or an accident to occur. So the safety risk management system, or the SRM, goes through how do we mitigate these risks? How do we manage them? So this is the FAA process, and this is what we use as part of our procedures. So as I talked about, all those checklists are going to help you identify any hazards, anything that are there. Then you're going to, in those checklists, be able to assess those hazards and also calculate the level of risk for every hazard you identify. You're going to analyze those risks, and then you're going to say, okay, if I do this, this, and this, here's how I can mitigate them. And then you're going to do those things. And then you're going to record it. So there's a record of everything you've done. And hopefully, and the goal is, the safest operation possible every single time you fly. So we'll look at things like, what is the risk likelihood? And let's be aware that these are subjective in a lot of ways. So what an inexperienced pilot might think the likelihood might be higher than a very experienced certified pilot who's well trained. Then your likelihood might be lower. And you have to think these things through. And so here's kind of how I explain it in a non-aviation way. Don't take any risk you wouldn't be able to explain to the media and in court. All right? So mitigate. So if something does happen, you're able to say, look, here's all the steps and procedures that I took. And, aviation isn't without risk. So you're always going to be in a risky situation. But you don't have to be negligent about it. And I think that's where this comes in. It's going to help you not be a negligent pilot, but to be a professional who diminishes the level of risk. So, what is likelihood? So everything you identify as those checklists as a potential kind of hazard, you're then going to say, okay, what's the likelihood? Is it very likely or frequent, or is it extremely improbable, and then everything on that Likert scale in between? The same time, you're going to say, okay, well, there's the risk. It's remote. All right, so I've decided this risk is remote. It's not improbable. It's not frequent. It could happen. And then the level of risk, if it was catastrophic, you can see there we have color coding: green go, yellow caution, red no go, or at least no go without permission. We have to analyze what that is and see if we can mitigate those risks down to a lower level. And you can see frequent and catastrophic. That's serious, right? Frequent, but the severity of if something does go wrong, it's negligible. All right, so you're going to proceed with caution at that point. If it's extremely improbable and negligible, it's good that you went over it in your mind. It's good that you wrote it down. But at the end of the day, you can go forward with the flight. So the goal is to move anything from red or yellow down to the green by mitigating the risk and reassessing it after you've put a mitigation in place. We also kind of have, and again, this all comes from the FAA's Advisory Circular 107-2 on small unmanned aircraft systems, and it's a good process. This is one of those areas where the FAA has given us something we can use. And in our own safety management system, we use this process, and it decides through Skyward who permission. Who do you need permission of? So if you're in any of the green, all right, and you've mitigated to the green, then the remote pilot in command who's been certified by us. Remember, in this case, you may have a license from the FAA, but until we put you on our 7120 form and identify you as one of our remote pilots in command, you don't have permission to just go out there and fly college equipment. So once you get to that point, and the goal is by the time you finish this course, you'll be at that point, you'll be able to fly and do your data collection and do your missions for your courses. But we need you to have that moniker from us that we consider you a remote pilot in command. Then you can make your decisions as long as you're in the green. If you come up with the 4 letters in yellow, 4D, 4E, 3D, well, then your instructor is going to have to ultimately give you permission in Skyward to complete that mission. They're going to need to look at your risk assessments and ensure that you have mitigated properly. If you're in some of the other yellow with those numbers, then the chief pilot or the air boss will be able to give permission for those. And then if you're in that red level, you're going to get to have a meeting with me, and we'll go through whether you're going to be able to do that mission or not. And again, it's all about looking at how you're going to mitigate it and whether or not the reward is worth the risk. And that's what we're trying to do. So there's a risk identification process that you're going to follow in the SMS. There's a mitigation process you're going to go through. And then there's a permission-based process as well that you're going to go through. And every complex organization that is scaled up should have some version that they're doing to mitigate risks and to do permission. So remember, we can manage risks, but we can't really manage people. You have to lead people. So part of our safety management system is the goal, the central goal of developing and maintaining a safety culture that recognizes the value of the safety management system. So, it's a living entity for us. It's not just a document in your course. So you need to learn it. What's that old saying? Learn it, live it, love it, right? You got to get there and say, that is what we're about here. That's what I'm about as a pilot. And when you practice that, the people you mentor will do the same. They're going to emulate your actions, and they're going to emulate the actions of our instructors. So the safety management system doesn't exist just for students. It exists for all of us. Clearly defined duties, responsibilities, and accountabilities for all your instructors and you as students. Provide employees with adequate training and information so your instructors are constantly learning and going through training as well. You're not alone in this. Just comply or exceed all the regulatory requirements. So remember that. We don't want to, so the FAA says, if we know more, because we've had risks mitigated and we've learned, we want to enhance every one of those regulatory aspects. We want to go above and beyond. Proactively manage risks associated with our operations. So we're going to constantly follow that SRM, that risk management process. We standardized it in our SMS, and you're going to follow it, and it's standardized in Skyward as well. So it's deliberate, it's strategic, and it's about mitigating those risks. Ensure externally supplied services and materials meet all regulatory. So we have enhancements to our fleet of drones, and they always are going to meet those regulatory requirements and exceed them as well. Redundancy. We build drones. We need to make sure there's redundancy in communications, and that all the drones that we build, and you'll build as part of your coursework, you can geofence, you can put these risk mitigations in place. So you have a real understanding of the internal components, sensors, as well as flight practices. We have performance goals, and we constantly measure against that, and we do evaluations. We do evaluations of our own system. And that's what you need to do, and you need to learn how we do that, because when you go into the workforce, you're going to want to do this exact same thing. Internal management and safety reviews. So we do audit ourselves. We have professionals come in and look at our aviation operations, look at what we're teaching you, our curriculum, and constantly updating this. Our vice president of academics is always telling me your syllabus are changing every semester. Of course they are. New information is gathered, new information is placed into this, all with the goal of having safer, more professional operations. Encourage everyone to report errors and safety issues, open, honest, non-punitive, not punishing, for the sake of improvement. That's what it's about. Safety is our objective in UAS operations. That's where we are. What's the future look like? Well, the future of risk management is in the hands of the UTM, which NASA is under. How do we integrate in cities, in rural areas, with delivery, with watching what people are doing, and aircraft in the sky? How do we do this? So this is NASA's image of what the future is going to look like. And as I've said to you many times, think about how many drones you see in the sky now, and where are we going in the future? So unmanned aircraft system traffic management is up to NASA. And so here's the idea. You should be aware of what they're working on. Many beneficial civilian applications of the UAS have been proposed. All right, but how do we get the infrastructure in place to safely manage the widespread use of these low-altitude aircraft and operations? All right, so we need a UAS traffic management system for low-altitude airspace. You're seeing some of this in the Lance or Lanc system. I prefer Lance personally. You're seeing it in that system as a starting point, but still we are far from integration. And without UTM in place with integration, it's really up to you to kind of manage your risks. So that's why we have such a comprehensive system, and we want to teach you that system so that when you go out into your operations, whether you're a single operator or you're working for a company, you're bringing those safety values with you. Okay, so the goal here is ultimately that you don't have to monitor. You don't have to keep visual eyes on every vehicle throughout its flight. All right? There could be data that would help managers make strategic decisions. Now remember, up until this point, manned aviation has a person involved at all times. We're talking about putting flying computers in the air without anyone monitoring them. They're working autonomously. That's never been done before. So thinking through these risks is important. You're part of that process by going through your risk mitigations. The FAA learns from drone pilots as they put in their applications to waive restrictions. It's one of the ways they can learn from us. And then all of us get what they've learned back in the course of regulations and operational procedures and guidelines and their advisory circulars. And that will work. But we're far from this. And you should be asking yourself, okay, how do we get there? Especially, I want you thinking about another semester question. Everything I'm learning about safety management in aviation, does it coincide? Does it conflict? Does it cooperate? Does it enhance existing operations? And does it make sense when we think about unsupervised, autonomous, unmanned vehicles, whether they're on the ground, in the air, or on the sea? Can we get the same level of safety? That's what you need to be thinking about. I can guarantee you that's what NASA and everyone is thinking about. And some of the ideas, okay, well, 400 feet will be the magic area. It'll belong. Well, think about all the things they got to think about. They got to think about the towers. You're starting to see some of this with remote ID. So, right now we have no idea who's flying that drone. So we're starting to see these things move in, and they're controversial, and people are arguing about them and fighting about them. What you want to be as a professional pilot is you don't want to get caught up in all that. You want to say, is it going to enhance safety? And if it is, well then, whatever the inconvenience might be, is probably worth it for the greater good. So here's NASA's vision. This vision will change over time as information is developed, but the goal is to have a completely integrated airspace with manned operations and unmanned operations of all kinds of sizes. And we've often talked about, the unmanned systems that'll carry passengers and how long it'll take to get that in place. That's the future. But let's also talk about safety management in terms of the crew. Okay? So you know about the risk mitigation. You know about what the future goals are. You're asking questions like, what I'm learning about safety doesn't make sense with that. But the other thing you're thinking about simultaneously in risk mitigation is who's on my crew? Because some of the great mitigators of risk are the people around you that are helping you with your operations. So your visual observer. What is the purpose of the visual observer? Is it just to look for aircraft in the sky and say, hey, I see a plane? It's well beyond Tattoo from Fantasy Island, right? We want something more than that out of our visual observer. So what should your VO know? And again, if you're taking this course, you'll have to take a quiz on this, so be aware. VOs should know about the scenarios that can impact flying conditions, including weather, ground, and airborne hazards. So they have to have quite a bit of knowledge to really be effective in helping you. Okay? They have to know about flight. It's just not somebody you said, okay, well, if you see a plane, yell out. Okay? It's more than that. VOs may not have ever passed the Part 107, but they should be aware of what's in it. They should know the regulations. They should know about flying over people or other prohibited activities. A lot of times, because of the depth perception, your VO may be, their job for one of your visual observers may not be planes in the sky at all, manned aircraft. Might be keeping your aircraft from encroaching upon someone else's property or groups of people. So it can be well beyond that. They're there to support you and keep you legal. All right? VOs not only need to be able to identify issues in the sky, but they need to tell you what to do. They can't just say, problem, right? They're part of the risk mitigation process. So they have to tell you, you need to land now. All right? Bring it down here. I'll grab it. I'll take a hand landing. Let's mitigate this risk immediately. I see something that I don't like. I don't think. Let's land. Let's reassess this situation. Your VO has to be part of your risk mitigation process. They not only need to be your eyes as a second set, they need to be a second mind helping you as well. The VO should constantly scan the skies and the ground to identify potential hazards and notify. So there's a lot going on for this person. There's a big role and responsibility they have. So they need to take safety as seriously as you do. So your VO needs to be as professional as you. So what kind of mitigations can happen from the use of a visual observer? Well, losses of situational awareness. We've all been there. You fly one of these white drones, there's a white cloud, and all of a sudden you can't see it anymore. You've lost situational awareness. It's there. You know it's there, but you've lost it in the sky. Well, your visual observer might have a different angle. And, if you're a guy to walkie-talkie, you might be saying, okay, I've lost it, and they can direct your eyes to the proper location. They can look for aircraft and mitigate a potential conflict or accident with a manned aircraft. They can stand on the ground and help you mitigate and not encroach again on other people's space. They can help you with elevation changes, or if there's water that you're flying over. They can help you if it's difficult for you as the remote pilot in command to maintain that direct line of sight. Okay, they don't come in place of it. You can't use a visual observer and say, all right, well, I'm going to fly to where I can't see, but you can see it. You still want to keep that visual line of sight as the remote pilot in command at all times, because that's the safest thing. And, you can't daisy chain VOs to get beyond visual line of sight as the pilot. But we will lose situational awareness. There will be moments when you can't see the aircraft unintentionally. And the VO can help you mitigate that risk, get that drone back to where you can see it, and keep your operation safe. So we require the use of VO in any kind of restricted airspace. Okay, so if we get permission, we're working with air traffic control. We not only want to have in that airspace, once our authorization comes from the FAA or from Lance, you're required as a warrant pilot to have a visual observer. You're required to have visual observers if you're doing any kind of night operations. You're required to have visual observers if you're doing flights over people. They're even required in the FAA's certificate of waiver. You should also think about some other ways you could use your visual observer to help you with risk. You've been flying now for a while. You know what the risks are. What ways can they help you? Duties: maintain visual eye contact with the aircraft at all time using unaided sight. In other words, you can't use binoculars. You got to have eyeglasses or contacts, but they have to be close enough to the drone to see it. Monitor the immediate surroundings, scan for potential hazard, and inform the remote pilot in command. Hey, you might have people coming up behind you, right? You might be in a really tight spot. Your fingers could go in any way. The visual observer can alert you. You got people coming behind you. This can be more than just the sky. Monitor the weather and inform the remote pilot. All right, you're in some intense situation flying. Your visual observer can say, we got a thunderstorm rolling in. We got a squall coming in here all of a sudden. And they can help you with that. They're going to direct you away, so they may be closer to where you're flying. And they can say, all right, pitch reverse. And they should get good at, and you as the pilot should get good at things like dead reckoning. And whatever measurement, whether it's imperial or the metric system, knowing that space, it's 1 yard. You got 1 yard till you hit that. You got 2 yards. You got 2 meters. Pick your thing, but have some idea of, and make sure you communicate with that visual observer and you say, all right, when you say a yard, give me a visual representation of how far that is. Our visual observers at Warren are required to know the Part 107 regulations. And in fact, Um, our visual observers here are always Part 107 certified or right on the cusp of being before we qualify you as a visual observer in our 7120 forms. Maintain constant communication with the remote pilot in command, giving relevant information. Here's the really important part. Visual observers often don't realize their importance. They don't realize their importance to your operation. So an untrained visual observer will start to do other things. You know, if you just take a buddy out there or a friend, you know, and they're not properly trained, they don't understand their role. So communication. And keep in mind, sometimes we talk about visual observers and it's not the most glamorous position you can have. And we think, oh, it's not the pilot. It's equally important to the pilot. And in some cases, the role in a situation might become the most important person on your crew, especially if they help you mitigate a risk and avoid an accident or an incident. Another crew member you might have is the person manipulating controls. You know this from Part 107. Okay. And what do FAA waivers do? FAA waivers are great because FAA waivers, if you get a waiver for night operations or flight over people, and one of the requirements of this course at the end is for you to write your flight operation waiver. Whether you ever submit it to the FAA or not is entirely up to you. But why are we having you do that? That's going to take you through every risk mitigation thought process possible. It's going to take you through all the checklists. You're going to have to do a deep dive, think about it, in order to author that. So waivers help the FAA understand what operators are doing, but going through the waiver process helps you as the operator understand the usefulness of your crew, understand how to risk mitigate location, environment, and people issues, understand what additional risks you're taking on for that complex operation, and you'll understand yourself as a pilot better. So right now, when we think about approved waivers, what do we need for night flights? Well, you have to address that on your drone. Most do not come with night lighting. And a lot of the night lighting sold on the internet really isn't aviation night lighting. Okay, so, you know, tricking that thing out so it's got all fluorescent light, that doesn't tell it tells, I guess, a manned aircraft there's something there, UFO or something. But proper lighting is red or white. We'll go over these things. We go over them in the course. And that's how you mitigate. You don't mitigate with improper night lighting. When we talk about flights over humans right now, approved waivers, it's either like the CNN in the video you'll watch with tethers or some kind of parachute system that have been approved. And our waiver is based on a parachute system, and you should definitely go ahead and read those waivers and concepts. Remember that anytime you have a waiver, you need this concept of operations. And the concept of operations is a risk management tool. It's a manual or plan that says how you're going to do these complex operations that the FAA has approved for you. And it really is mitigating every potential risk and every potential scenario you can think of in advance. But that doesn't mean, okay, just follow the manual. The manual needs to be constantly updated. Your concept of operation needs to be informed by your experience. So even though we have this, we don't rest on it. And you don't rest on it as a student, and we don't rest on it as an institution. It is as good as the day it was written. It's better when we learn things and improve it and go through a continuous improvement process. That's what safety risk management is to me. It's continuous improvement. How do I become safer and safer and safer? Think about your own experience as a pilot. How safe were you the first day you flew? How safe do you feel you are now? What does experience bring to the table? These are all part of the safety system. So here's something I saw. This is the Skydio X2. It's not even released at the time of this video. But the webinar they gave the other day had the director of marketing from Skydio on. And his basic argument was, we build a drone so good that a person with no experience can fly it in complex situations. So there's been several semester-long questions. This is going to be a semester. Look, they said it. I didn't say it. I look at that and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. If something goes wrong, you pretty much increased your liability. Your question is going to be, their argument is going to be that drone has enough artificial intelligence that it does the safety mitigation for you. And this webinar was for law enforcement. Grab it from the bottom there. It's got a nice giant battery to last a long time. And just toss it in the air and go. And you don't even have to have experience. It's crash proof. Well, you can go out and Google Skydio and see tons of crashes already on the R2. People have figured out how to crash the crash-proof drone. It's still working on radio frequencies. It still has the potential for flyaways. It has the potential for the systems and the camera system to fail. It has the potential to be a mechanism where we're overconfident in the machine's ability. Okay? And even though that machine has AI, that is a very, very foolish thing to think about, to say, oh, we're so good that we took care of all that for you. You remember from your robotics class, or you'll learn it when you take it, autonomy does not take the human out of the equation. It may diminish control requirements, but it never diminishes supervisory command requirements. In other words, all right, so you don't even sell the R2 with a remote control. They at least sell this one with a remote control. Okay. And it is an impressive amount of technology, and it is well designed and well put together. No doubt. We have them. We fly them. Solid drone. One of my favorite drones. But as we move into those levels of autonomy, the requirement that I have isn't in the remote control. Isn't control. It moves to command. It moves to supervision. So mitigating the safety risks become even more paramount on me as the remote pilot in command. Think of it. It's not the remote pilot in control. It's the remote pilot in command. So your human-machine interface is still there. The machine has a lot of autonomy, yes. It has a lot of artificial intelligence, yes. But it doesn't replace you as the remote pilot in command. There's nothing on the Part 107 that says you are responsible unless you're using Skydio because it's so good. It's responsible. No, you're always responsible. So safety and mitigation exists with this drone as well. All right, I do not like the idea of anybody selling something saying, especially aviation related, saying, "Oh, don't worry, just give it to anybody." Train it, and their argument is it's cheaper to buy our drone than it is to train your people. I don't even understand that argument. Who in their right mind in any complex organization wants untrained people? There's no such thing as enough training. So keep that in mind, because it's going to be your job when you get to a company at some point when the boss says, "Hey, we're going to use these Skydios." Don't even need to train anybody. You say, "Whoa. What if the machine fails? Who's going to be responsible? Skydio? Who's liable? Skydio or us?" All right? It's going to be some combination of the two. All right? So nothing replaces experience and training for safety in aviation. Okay? Nothing replaces communication. The only thing the Skydio does is diminish your control requirements, enhancing and placing more emphasis on your supervisory or command portion of the operation. We have the Sky deal, but we will never take their director of marketing. I think it was I can't even remember if it was the director of marketing. We will not take that. Not here. You will be a professional. You will mitigate risk. You will take safety seriously, because even thinking that violates the very principles of safety culture in aviation. And in my opinion, inappropriate for any manufacturer to suggest that they can get beyond the need for training and experience. Training and experience in aviation, repetitive checklists, redundancy, all of these things are going to be what prevents an accident. I'm Dr. Will Austin for Warren County Community College. I'll see you in the next video.